Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to do a little review of this 2022 Acura TLX. This is the A-Spec trim with all-wheel drive. If you're looking for a video where we go over this car's quirks and features, I suggest you go elsewhere. That's not what we do here. We're going to talk about the experience of the car, how it looks, how it feels, how it sounds, how it drives. Let's talk first a little bit about some specs. Like I said, this is a 2022 model, part of the generation that started in 2021. This car is powered by a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder engine, making 272 horsepower, 280 foot-pounds of torque. It's connected to a 10-speed, yes, 10-speed automatic transmission. It has Acura's patented super handling all-wheel drive, which we'll talk about later in the drive. And this is the A-Spec trim. Essentially what that means is it's going to look like a Type S, even though it's not a Type S. So it has all the blacked out pieces, blacked out trim around the fog lights, blacked out trim around the grille surround. You have these sort of gray 19-inch wheels. I don't know, I don't love them. I wish there was maybe a machined face to them. That would have been nice. You have the A-Spec badging here, black trim on the side windows. This nice aggressive rear spoiler. The A-Spec badging, you have dual exhaust back here. It's a very, very aggressive, crisp, sharp looking car. The styling department of Acura, in my opinion, knocked it out of the park when it comes to this car. You can see there's a line that starts at the base of the grille here, comes around this curve, comes through, kind of goes through this little chiseled dimple thing, and it goes all the way up the door sill, kind of wraps up over the door, goes through the door handles, over and across, and it kind of fades right above the rear bumper. You have a nice little Acura logo there. This is an incredibly aggressive looking sports sedan. That's indeed what it is. Now, previously, when anytime someone thinks of an Acura sedan, they think, oh, isn't that just a fancy Accord? Well, not this case. You can look at the specs and you'll see that the length of this car and the wheelbase of this car are both within 2 inches of that of the Accord. However, Acura prioritized different dimensions on this car, different proportions on this car to make it look more sporty. And you'll see, and we'll see this later, that there are 6 inches less rear legroom in this car than the Accord. I don't know how they pulled off that magic, but they did. This car is rated at 21 miles a gallon city, 29 highway. Not the best for a sleek aerodynamic car with a 10-speed automatic transmission and a 4-cylinder engine, but we'll see what we get on today's drive. Nice sort of premium sci-fi welcoming sound. This car comes across very premium, very futuristic, very sci-fi, as opposed to kind of premium luxury, something you'd find in maybe a Lexus or a Genesis. This car has this red, sort of dark maraschino color all over the seats, the center console, the doors with this black trim. It's very nice. In terms of the materials, soft touch up top, soft touch here, nice big, what I call the oh shit handle. This car is chiseled, has a very cockpit feeling to it. I like how these arches come over here. And you have, everything's a curved surface. You have this big arch here, you have a big arch here, you have these big curves over here. Everything is large gestures that all come together in a really nice way. The A-Spec trim gets you all this red stitching everywhere. You have a wireless touchpad. This thing, which you can listen to other people complain about, glossy black plastic, which you can also hear other people complain about. Analog gauges with a small screen in between. You have this really nice leather-wrapped steering wheel. A little bit firm. Its padding's not super thick, but it's very grippy. Really easy to have a good grip of on the road. Decent amount of buttons on the wheel, but overall it's very nice looking. Silver paddle shifters. I think it's a 10-inch screen over there. You have heated and cooled seats, and speaking of the seats, they are very comfortable. They are all power adjustment, good thigh support, decent bottom bolsters to hold you in place, side bolsters on the seat, hug you nice and well. Not a ton of support up on the shoulders, but everything's nice and cushy and padded and supportive. These seats are definitely good for some hooliganry as well as some road trips. In terms of visibility, you have a moderate size A-pillar that comes to kind of a thick base, not the best, but you do have blind spot monitoring in here. The windshield, while it is very wide, it's not very tall. It is a bit dark in this cabin. All the windows are a bit on the short side, but again, that's all part of the styling. In terms of looking back there, you do have a nice corner window. Rear window is pretty wide again, not very tall. C-pillar is on the moderate size, not the thinnest, not the thickest. You do have a sunroof up here. Decent amount of knee room. I have good headroom up here. It is very comfortable in the front seat. How about in the back? All right, sitting in the back seat of the Acura TLX behind myself at 6'1", and not the best. I have my seat all the way down. I have practically zero toe room. If I sit kind of upright, my head is brushing the ceiling almost into the ceiling, but only if I lean back all the way. If I kind of sit up, just the hair brushes it. Thank goodness that these seats have these scalloped out bits in this and the hard plastic seat back, because otherwise my knees would be in there. If I try to get my head out of the roof, very quickly I run out of the leg room. This is where those 6 inches of rear seat room between the Accord and the TLX come into play. I have no idea how Acura managed to do this. Otherwise, the seats are very soft, they're very cushy. Legs are kind of up in the air, so I don't really have a lot of thigh support. You do have a large hump between the center console here. You do have rear ventilation though, seat back pockets on both sides. The rear seat could be worse. It's not horrible, but it's not generous either. And I figured out where those 6 inches came from. If you compare this to an Accord on the outside, like I said, the length and the wheelbase is pretty similar. But what Acura did, because this is a front engine, front wheel drive based car, they wanted the styling to suggest otherwise. So they kind of shifted the cabin towards the back. So there's this space here between the front door sill and the front tire. That is not there on an Accord. The Accord, the front door is much closer to the front wheel well. So that means it shifts the dash forward, shifts the front seat forward. So the back seat essentially is in the same spot that it is in an Accord. But for styling purposes, the dash, the front, the steering wheel, the front seats are shifted back towards the back seats, and it eats up all of that rear seat room. So we've talked about how the car looks, how it feels on the inside. Let's see how this thing drives. Push button start. Kind of an anticlimactic. Nothing fancy sounding. Pretty quiet engine. You'll notice this big dial, dynamic mode, most important feature in the dash. What this does, it adjusts your driving modes. We have comfort, we have normal, and we have sport. You also have individual. We press and hold that, we'll get into the individual menu. So you have engine. You can adjust it comfort, normal, and sport. Basically adjust your throttle response, transmission mapping. You have steering, comfort, normal, and sport. Just the sensitivity, adjust the weight. You have suspension. Now here's the interesting thing about suspension setting. This is the A-Spec trim. The Type S and the Advanced package comes with adaptive dampers. The A-Spec does not have adaptive dampers, so what the heck does suspension settings do? It actually programs the super handling all-wheel drive. So Sport will prioritize more power to the rear wheels. This car can send 70% of power to the back tires and 100% of that 70% from one side to the other. So Sport will give you up to that 70%. Comfort will be a little bit less. You have idle stop, you can adjust your lighting, lots of interior lighting dynamics that you can turn on at night, pretty cool. You have D/S. What this does is it changes it from drive to sport. And then technically, I think it also stands for shift, because that's how you can activate your paddle shifters. You can see now it says SM1, SM2. We're just going to start in normal drive, in normal, and see how this goes. Red on silver gauges, they're not the best in daylight. I will say there's not a ton of contrast, but I'm very thankful you have this big display with the screen, with the speed. One thing that I find a bit odd though is when you want to switch pages, it like highlights your current page before you go to the next one, and then you can switch. So it's like, you can see those little bars around the outside. It goes away, so now you're in that page. In order to get out, you have to go into like, you click it once and you'd think it would just switch the page, but no, it goes into the adjust mode and then you can switch pages. So it takes an extra step. It's a bit annoying. Decent amount of power. Not the most inspiring sounding engine. Not a ton of road noise. Not a ton of wind noise. Side mirrors are pretty big, pretty generous, easy to see your blind spots, so that's good. And this steering wheel, this perforated section on the side, the way that your hands just stick to it, and the shape of it behind it. Someone at Acura definitely spent time making sure that this was a very ergonomic, friendly, sporty shape that you could just grab onto the wheel. One thing I wish, and obviously this would have taken more R&D, is the little graphics on the screen. While they are cool, if you have the A-Spec, I want it to have the A-Spec spoiler. I want the car to look like your car. Yeah, when you step into the throttle, this car, it has the power, but the engine just has this little grumbly, gritty aspect to it that's just not the best. I'm going to sport mode for this green light. Oh yeah, you can hear that turbo blow off sound. That was cool. In sport mode, you can see it's holding the gears higher. And even coming to that red light, I was off the gas when I switched into sport, and it downshifted anyway, expecting me to just stab the throttle. If I go into sport, I can manually shift. Paddle shifters are not super responsive. Now, and then it shifts, now, and then it downshifts. So there's probably about a 3/4 second delay. It's not the best. Now there's a myth about this car and I want to see if it's true. If I go into first gear, not touching the paddles, already went into second. I did not touch anything. I wasn't even half throttle. It shifted for me. Acura does not trust its clients. Even in sport mode and in manual mode, it does not trust its clients to shift properly from first to second. That is embarrassing. It didn't even get up to 3,000 RPM. And off the gas, gas. Throttle response is okay, and then also add into that turbo lag, and it's kind of meh. It's not the worst, not the best. Go back into normal mode here. Now you can be in normal and sport, which doesn't really make sense, but sport is for the transmission. The customization of this car is a little bit confusing because you have the engine, within the individual mode, you have the engine setting that you can adjust to sport, but then outside of that you also have this transmission sport. So the engine setting, I believe, is mostly throttle response, and this sport is transmission mapping. I'm not sure. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's a redundant thing. I think this should have been D/N for drive/manual, but that's just me. This is a car that you can be proud of how it looks. You know people are going to look at this thing. It's one of those cars that you get out in the parking lot, you turn back around to look at your car. It's that good looking. Again, this is all subjective, but I haven't met a journalist yet who doesn't love the way that this thing looks. In normal mode, this thing does hunt for fuel economy. 45 miles an hour, and we are churning out about 1,300 RPM. We were mentioning fuel economy earlier, about how a car that you would think is very aerodynamic with a 10-speed automatic doesn't even get 30 miles a gallon on the highway. Part of that is weight. This car, A-Spec trim with the all-wheel drive, weighs almost 4,000 pounds, 3990. Where the heck all that weight came from, I know not. However, lots of premium materials in it. It is relatively quiet, but that's pretty heavy for a sedan. All right, here we go. Turning off traction control, putting in the sport mode, and we'll see how this thing does. I'm gonna leave it in auto for now. A little bit of understeer from those tires. Those tires do not like that at all. You do have this interesting shifter. It kind of reminds you of like those childhood games where you have the, you put the circle piece in the circle and the square piece in the square, but it works, you can get used to it. So off throttle, it's a little nose heavy. This does have a 57-43 front rear weight distribution. But the magic comes in with that super handling all-wheel drive. We're going to do this corner on throttle, see what happens. It brings that rear around. Not a ton of grip from these stock tires. These come with kind of touring all-season tires. They should have been all ultra-high performance all seasons, in my opinion. That was kind of a miss on Acura's part. So right now I have suspension on sport, steering on sport. I'll put the engine on normal. With the steering in sport, it is still a bit on the light side. There is some heft to it. It has that classic Honda elasticity to it. Steering ratio in this car is very quick, especially beyond the 30-degree steer mark. This thing is just darty as heck, and makes this car shed a lot of weight in terms of feel. You would not guess that this car is almost 4,000 pounds by the way that it steers. We put the steering into normal. There you go. It lightens up greatly. That dartiness is still there. It's still very responsive. Just a bit dead. The immediacy between turning the wheels and the front tire turning is pretty quick. It's a little light to feel like you're commanding an almost 4,000 pound car. I think I much prefer the weight, the heft of the sport steering. Let's do some manual driving. Yeah, about half a second to 3/4 of a second delay. A lot of cars, the downshifts will be much faster than the upshifts. This car seems to be about the same. So, I would say if you've never driven a manual transmission car, then this will probably be good enough for you. If you're coming from something that has really good response, this is going to seem, I'm going to say, borderline unacceptably slow. Acura did claim to make the paddle shift response faster in the Type S version of this car. They said 40% faster. I just don't see the need to handicap your lower versions, especially if this one is supposed to be the sporty one. This is the sporty looking one, and yet it doesn't have any sporty advantages. Let's test some speed bumps. We can try the driving modes. We'll start out in normal. It's on the firmer side. It's not ridiculously stiff. You can definitely tell there's suspension soaking it up. Alright, yeah, it's not the best, not the worst. Just don't go super fast over speed bumps. Now I'll put it in sport mode, see how it does. Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same, because it should be. This car does not have the adaptive dampers. One complaint, I would say, when you look at the steering wheel and you see the paddle shifters behind it, they look like they're very tall, and they are, but only on the upper end. They stop on the underside of the paddle shifters. They should be taller down here. They don't extend far enough on the lower end. So when I'm grabbing them, my ring finger and my pinkies are kind of just dangling in midair, and I'm only touching them really with my index and my middle fingers. I think you can get paddle shift extensions for this car. You might want to invest in that if you see yourself using the relatively slow paddles pretty often. Yeah, in sport mode, you can just tell because of the transmission mapping, this car is just ready. They've programmed it so that this car is ready to attack. The problem is the engine just kind of has this raspy, gritty thing going on. It's not a very meaty sounding engine. Although in sport mode at higher RPMs, you do have a sort of pumped in engine sound through the speakers to help that effect. Doesn't mean that the car's not fast. It has power. Once that turbo kicks in, this thing can go. It doesn't have a soundtrack that's super emotional, and that's unfortunate. Alright, we're in sport mode. Turn off traction again. You can temporarily change gears if you want, and then if you leave it alone, it'll stay. Yeah, this thing has grip. Once you step on it, you're in sport mode. Oh man, you could feel those rear wheels. Here's the super handling all-wheel drive indicator. You can see a lot of power going to that outer rear wheel. Yep. I could see it right there for a split second. Most of the power was going to the right rear wheel to help power us around that turn. This super handling all-wheel drive system, it is so fun. That is the best feature of this car, in my opinion. Off throttle. Yeah, it's kind of nose heavy. It's pretty good. These tires just let this thing down. I don't know why. I guess also maybe it was like something Acura was doing to neuter this car compared to the Type S. That's a bit disappointing. Throttle response wasn't quite there. Even with the traction control off and I went to the gas, it wasn't quite there. It's possible maybe that was some turbo lag also. The thing's kind of a mixed bag. It has power, but the engine doesn't sound good. The handling is really nice, but the tires let this thing down. Tires are easily fixed. I'm not going to hold that against it so much, except that that's a decent investment, you know. When you drive this car for a while, it's nice to be in it. You do realize that it is a bit dark. You can get this interior either all black with red trim, or like this, where it's black and then the seats are red with black trim. Alright, throttle response off now. We'll try it in comfort, see if it's any worse or about the same. And gas. Yeah, oh, I love that turbo blow-off sound. That's cool. And then in sport, see, downshift, so it's naturally going to be better. And off and gas. Yeah. Throttle response is better in sport mode. If we go into individual, I want to try something. If I move this engine from normal to sport, what it does is it holds lower gears. Now if I'm in the sport of the engine within individual, and then I also press sport, it goes down an additional gear. That's interesting. This thing has so many gears, I'm telling you. Fifth gear at 32 miles an hour, you're at 2,000 RPM. Isn't that insane? You have to be in sixth gear to be at a normal RPM range going 30 miles an hour. That is kind of nuts. What that tells me is that the gears are kind of short and close together. You would think that for fuel savings, they would have spaced out the gears a little bit more. I guess the benefit, what you can do here is, and again, I honestly don't know. Right now we have everything in sport within individual. Is that different than just sport mode? I don't know. Customization's a little bit, it's cool. If you're someone who likes tinkering and messing around and making everything your own experience, it's great. But to me, it's a little bit redundant. My only question, I would guess, is having everything within sport in individual, do you get the pumped-in engine sound that you get in sport mode? I think that would be my question. You know, sometimes things like this make you appreciate the cars that have one mode, and you just get in, and it's perfect. Well, we'll focus on that later. Through the twisties, this car is just so it is so engaging to just chuck around a turn. It puts a smile on your face. Again, just there's a point at which the steering response it's so darty. You could scare some passengers if you don't warn them about that. But again, holy crap bar on the door. Great idea, Acura. And gas. And there's the turbo. There you go. And now 45 miles an hour, we're in 7th gear. Holy crap. That's so good. You can feel the car leaning on that outer rear tire. Especially on throttle. On throttle, it's pretty neutral, but it's nose heavy, especially with these tires. It just dawned on me, if you're an individual and you put the engine in normal, you can still put the transmission in sport and get that extra drivetrain response without the extra engine sound. That's the workaround. You put engine in normal, press the shift button, and then you could go manual from there. From the first moment you step in this car, you're hit with this kind of sci-fi, futuristic, techie vibe, and so all this customization and settings and tinkering, it kind of fits that character. These gears are so short. I think the best way to describe this car is just pretty good. The engine is quick, doesn't sound great, it's pretty good. Seats are comfortable, but you don't have a ton of room in the back, so it's pretty good. The steering, responsive, but there's not a ton of feel. It's very quick, good handling, but it has that slight Honda disconnectedness to it, even though it has that elastic feel. It's pretty good. Visibility, short windows, but good mirrors, thin blind spots. It's pretty good. Everything about this car is pretty good. Now that we're getting onto the highway, put it into sport mode, see what it can give us. One thing I don't love, when you're in individual and you go to the drive mode, if you turn it to the right, you'd think it would just go straight to sport. You have to start normal and go to sport. Also, every time you turn on the car, it goes back to normal. You have to switch it to individual if you want, but it keeps your settings. I love that turbo blow-off sound. That is cool. Alright, so in sport mode, transmission likes to hold itself at about 2200 RPM, 65 miles an hour. If we go into shift, it's going to hold close to 4,000, but then realize that it's stupid and go back to 2200 RPM. It was sort of holding itself in 7th gear. So now we're in manual mode. 8th gear is just under 2,000. 9th gear is about 1,700. And 10th gear is 1,500. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The difference between 8th and 10th is 400 RPM. Enough said. A little bit of wind noise coming over the side mirrors. A little bit more road noise. You wouldn't necessarily think this is a luxury experience. But the car feels very planted. This is where that nearly 4,000 pound curb weight comes into play. The car feels very planted in the lanes. You don't feel like you're going to get blown around by trucks. The steering is not overly twitchy. Like I said, the seats are nice and supportive. You could easily do a road trip in this thing as long as you're in the front seat. If your height starts with a 6 and you're sitting in the back, sorry. The way this car handles, again, beyond about this 30-degree mark, it really encourages you to just throw it into a turn, and then the tire's like, no, stop it. So it's a bit confusing. Flooring it. Above 4,000 RPM, that engine takes on a different character. And man, is it nice. Finally, all that grittiness goes away and you're left with a roar. But you have to be above 4,000 RPM. We're cruising along here. Looks like we're getting about 30 miles a gallon, which is what the rating is. Off throttle. It's not bad. And then when you get on the gas, it takes a little second. It's like the power doesn't quite get, I mean, traction control is on also right now, but it's almost like you can feel the computer taking a second just to kind of process the situation, process the wheel input, and sort of calculate how much power to send to the rear wheels. Yeah, it just rotates right around, and it sheds 1,000 pounds. That's the only way to put it. It does not feel like a 4,000 pound car. I think my earlier assessment stands. This car is pretty good. It's not the most refined thing, not the most sporty thing, but it tries. That you can tell a lot of the R&D went into making this thing handle a lot lighter than it is, and it does. Now that the test drive is completed, let's give the 2022 Acura TLX A-Spec a Schwartz Score. The Schwartz Score is broken down into 12 categories with a total potential score of 100. Scores are given right after the test drive when impressions are still fresh. A disclaimer, much of this review consists of our previous impressions of the 2023 Acura TLX Type S. Exterior styling of the Acura TLX is, in a word, spectacular. It is an eye-catching design with sharp and aggressive creases on the hood and front fascia, headlights that give a mean stare, a distinctive character line that extends down the length of the car, and wide rear fenders. The A-Spec adds 19-inch wheels, a well-proportioned rear spoiler, and sporty black trim. It may not look quite as stunning as some bona fide sports cars, but Acura's designers have achieved near perfection with this sedan. The gray wheels don't distract from the car's style, but don't attract much attention of their own. In fairness, some might find the extroverted styling too much. It earns an 8 out of 10. The interior of this Acura, much like the exterior, exudes style and intent. It takes a while to find a surface or panel that isn't sculpted or molded in a classy way. The aesthetic of the doors, the dash, and the center console unify to provide a cohesive, futuristic, sporty interior. Red stitching and maraschino cherry-colored seats provide some youthful flair. All buttons feel solid and durable. Many surfaces are padded adequately, although nothing can be called plush. The overall impression is that the interior is well designed and well built, but doesn't necessarily feel luxurious. It gets a 7 out of 10 here. The front seats are supportive and comfortable, suitable for road trips and shenanigans on the back roads. The A-Spec comes with 12-way power, heated, and cooled front seats, providing accommodations for all body types. The only downside is a lack of headroom. The moonroof cuts into available space even with the front seats all the way down. Drivers with tall upper bodies may find it on the tight side. Overall, they earn 8 out of 10. The rear seats, given the size of the vehicle, are a disappointment. The TLX is within an inch of the Honda Accord's length and within 2 inches of its wheelbase, and yet has nearly 6 inches less rear seat legroom. If you're taller than 5'10", the back seats are not road trip ready. Legroom, footroom, and headroom are all mediocre but not punishing. However, the seat cushions provide above-average thigh support, and rear occupants get their own air vents. Overall, given the TLX's exterior proportions, the back seats are frustratingly unusable. They get a 3 out of 10. Road noise is mostly muted in the TLX. Over most road surfaces, a faint rumbling can be heard, likely going unnoticed by most. The pavement makes itself known on more abrasive surfaces, but overall the cabin ambiance remains refined. 4 out of 5 for road noise. The 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder engine is a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde machine. During most casual driving, the engine possesses a slightly off-putting, wispy, raspy grittiness. In sport mode, extra bassy engine sound is pumped in through the speakers. However, above 4,000 RPM when VTEC kicks in, the engine awakens from its slumber and demonstrates a much more refined, muscular noise. Overall, 3 out of 5 here. In terms of acceleration, where a 0 to 60 time below 3 seconds is a 10 and above 9.5 seconds is a 1, the Acura TLX A-Spec all-wheel drive with its 6.4 second 0 to 60 earns a 7 out of 10. The 2022 TLX is equipped with a 10-speed automatic transmission. This transmission is shared with the Honda Odyssey. Wait. Oh no. Really? Yep. This luxury sports sedan shares the same transmission as a minivan. Look it up. The gear ratios are identical. This is where the TLX falls short. The shifts are smooth, and in automatic mode, the transmission behaves decently well. However, the manual mode is an illusion of control. The 10-speed will auto-upshift at red line, and it'll auto-upshift from first to second below 3,000 RPM. The paddle shifters in the A-Spec are somewhat responsive, but never produce immediate responses. Throttle response gets quicker as one ascends through the driving modes. However, if the transmission needs to downshift for extra power, it takes approximately 2 seconds for it to choose the appropriate gear. This is the paradox of the TLX. If you want great throttle response, put it into sport mode. However, if you don't like the transmission holding itself at 3 to 4,000 RPM, you have to put it in manual mode and deal with delayed and restricted engagement. Overall, 3 out of 5 for Drivetrain. Handling is a selling point for the TLX. With Acura's super handling all-wheel drive, the car seemingly sheds 1,000 pounds in the twisties. The power sent to the rear wheels helps rotate the car beautifully, encouraging the driver to counterintuitively add gas in a turn. This feature is accentuated in sport mode. Otherwise, the car behaves naturally in normal and comfort. Honda and Acura have mastered chassis dynamics, and this vehicle, despite its nearly 4,000-pound curb weight, is evidence of that. However, the A-Spec lacks the extra aggressive Sport Plus mode, stickier tires, and extra chassis bracing found in the Type S. In the end, it gets an 8 out of 10. Steering feel is somewhat lacking in the TLX. The steering in comfort and normal modes feels like most Honda products, light, quick, but somewhat disconnected. Sport mode increases the weight to a satisfying degree, and the variable ratio steering makes the 2-ton vehicle almost feel darty, but the presence of an electronic middleman is evident. 5 out of 10. Ride quality in the TLX is perfectly acceptable for being a performance luxury sedan. Even with the A-Spec's 19-inch wheels, bumps are absorbed quite well. The A-Spec lacks the Type S's adaptive dampers. As a result, every imperfection in the road comes through the seat, but the ride won't break your teeth. The suspension is tuned between the Type S's normal and sport settings, and that feels accurate. It earns a 6 out of 10 here. Visibility in the TLX is adequate. The front windshield is short but wide. The base of the A-pillar is thicker than it could be, but visibility around the C-pillar and out the back is quite good. Blind spot monitoring and other safety systems aid with ascertaining the corners of the vehicle. Overall, 3 out of 5. This brings the Schwartz Score of the 2022 Acura TLX A-Spec to 63 out of 100. Lastly, the EPA rated the 2022 Acura TLX A-Spec all-wheel drive at 21 miles a gallon city, 29 highway. We achieved 27 miles per gallon during our test drive. On a scale where above 50 miles per gallon is a 10 and below 17 miles per gallon is a 1, the TLX earns 4 bonus points.